Mosman Bay, where a narrow arm of Sydney Harbour snakes into one of the city's wealthiest suburbs. In a competitive human world, the possession of territory here is a prize that goes to the winners. But the apparent tranquility of this setting can be deceptive. In the remnants of rainforest that fringe the harbour, the native animals, and in particular the birds, continue to compete among themselves for territory, for food, and for survival. But while these struggles continue, the arrival of the new residents has introduced new conflicts. As the human population continues to dominate the environment, the ecological balance itself is undergoing radical change. For some birds, life is easier than before. But for every species that benefits from the human invasion, there will inevitably be some that are not so fortunate. A generation ago, the appearance of a pardalote or a fairy wren was a common sight. Now, these birds are becoming fewer. In urban areas along Australia's eastern seaboard, small native birds are disappearing at an alarming rate. And the song of a melodious killer, the pied currawong, has begun to dominate all others. Before the Europeans came to Australia, this was the home of the pied currawong, the open forests of the Blue Mountains west of Sydney. Only when the late autumn gales swept the uplands did the birds migrate to the coastal plain. Even in Mosman Bay, the winter storms blew hard from the south. But the winds are not as harsh, and the rains are not as icy as in the high country inland. And when the storms have passed, the winter days can be fine and mild. For the currawongs, winter used to be a time of scarcity. Even in the bay's sheltered rainforest thickets, food was hard to find. For the nectar-eating lorikeets, there was always a few flowering trees to be found. But the currawong is an omnivore. It needs fruit and protein. And during winter, in the bushland surrounding the harbour, both were in short supply. For protection in the unfamiliar territory, and to discover and dominate what little food was available, the currawongs formed into packs like wolves, and they still do. It used to be their best chance of survival, but these days the flocks are growing larger, and it's other species whose very existence is placed in peril. Solitary older birds are the first to fly in. A mature female joins her mate. Quarrelsome young juveniles, born the previous spring, make up the numbers. Eventually, the Mosman Bay flock boasts more than 30 birds, enough to see off any challengers. High above the city, the currawongs defend their territory. In the business district, just down the harbour, a rival flock has taken possession. They're streetwise scavengers, wily survivors in a world of steel and concrete. But for the currawongs as well as humans, the leafy shores of Mosman Bay offer a more desirable environment. From from its TV aerials, the local heroes advertise their rights of possession, as once they did from the tallest trees of the forest. The flock demands respect from every other creature that shares its territory. The magpie is a dominant cousin. This youngster would be more than a match for any single currawong. But when it decides to challenge the flock, it takes on more than it can handle. For the gang of young currawongs, the magpie's presence is an insult not to be tolerated. Within minutes, they've put the intruder to flight and are left in triumphant possession of the field. And it's a field far richer now than in the past. There's no winter scarcity these days. Humans have seen to that. Food is everywhere, and year by year, the currawong numbers swell.
I really like currawongs. They're pretty, they're bold, they're resourceful, they're intelligent. There's just too many of them. You can have too much of a good thing.
30 years ago, biologist Dr. Harry Recker arrived from New York to study Australia's unique bird life. And for most of the time since then, he's been trying to warn an unheeding world that the population of currawongs is exploding.
There's a number of reasons why currawongs have increased. There's been a change in the habitat in Sydney, but that's not the most important reason. The most important reason is there's more food for the birds. Humans have introduced a whole array of plant species into the Australian environment which carry fruit into and through the winter. And currawongs eat fruit. What that fruit has meant is that all the young currawongs produced during the spring and summer, instead of dying of starvation like they're supposed to, find all this fruit, the privet, the lantana, you name it, they eat it. And it means they live. And the population has exploded.
The currawongs are not the only birds to profit from the exotic plants that grow all over Mosman. Rainbow lorikeets feast on the nectar of the winter-flowering coral tree. And so do silver eyes and honey-eaters. And yet the population of these smaller birds is not increasing. In fact, they're disappearing. And according to Harry Recker, the currawong's to blame.
Currawongs not only eat fruit, they eat baby birds. They eat adult birds. Currawongs are the wolves of the bird world. They're consummate predators. They're as good as I am at finding bird nests, and they're much better at me than at getting at those nests, getting the eggs out, and feeding the nestlings. Their impact as individual birds isn't great. It's the numbers that's the problem. It's the millions of currawongs feeding on tens of millions of nests and probably tens of thousands of adult birds during the course of the year that has literally driven small birds out of the Sydney environment. They've eaten them up. That's the problem with the currawong explosion, and it's all our fault.
But like all Australian native birds, the currawongs are legally protected species. Dr. Richard Major of the Australian Museum knows that without overwhelming evidence, that law will not be changed. And so, all over Sydney, he's planting artificial nests containing artificial eggs.
The idea of these eggs is that when a predator comes along and attacks the eggs in the nest, the predator will tend to bite into it or peck it, realise that it's not a real egg, but in the process they've left tooth imprints or beak imprints from which we can identify who the predator was.
It's not enough to place his nests on public land around the foreshore. The real battlefield is in suburban backyards, and Dr. Major has persuaded some 2,000 householders to help him identify the enemy.
Welcome in.
What our nests look like is we've made them out of a tennis ball and wrapped them in coconut so they look like a willy wagtail's nest. Here's yours. There you are, you can see there's a tennis ball inside, coconut fibre and plasticine eggs which we've speckled with paint.
Whoever turns out to be the major predator of small birds' nests, Richard Major agrees with Harry Recker that the number of currawongs has dramatically increased.
There's three main things about our urban areas which make them more attractive to currawongs than they do to small birds. We've tended to replace scrubby areas with manicured lawns and tall trees. These don't provide the cover that small birds need for nesting. The second thing we've done is planted ornamental fruit-bearing trees, and these plants provide a vast amount of food for currawongs. And the third thing is the amount of food they're actually getting from people.
The food laid on bird tables is often monopolised by currawongs. But even if the smallest birds were brave enough, minced meat, bread and grapes are hardly their diet. Nothing, however, scares a rainbow lorikeet. But currawongs and lorikeets, says Richard Major, have no real need in a mild Sydney winter for the food that humans give them.
I think people should realise that feeding birds is fulfilling a need in themselves rather than a need for the bird itself.
Now they are wild birds too, aren't they? To see them in a kitchen, I think that's really beautiful.
Mrs. Berry loves the lorikeets, but her favourite visitor is a currawong called Maggie.
The first time I saw that particular bird, Maggie, I thought it was a magpie. For a long time I thought she was a magpie, until I've learned the difference between the currawongs and the magpies. Come on, breakfast is here. There is definitely something between towards me, the way she looks at me. It's like mesmerizing me, that I have to talk to her and I feel I want to pick her up and cuddle her. I never thought I could get so close with a bird.
My name is Tanya and I feed the currawong. They are my friends and I love them very much. And they are very gentle birds and very polite.
Harry Recker doesn't think the currawong is either gentle or polite. And the generosity of people like Tanya, he argues, is making matters worse.
They like feeding birds, and they feed them high-quality, high-protein food. Steak, cheese, dog food.
Come on, Daddy.
And that means, along with all that fruit, currawongs are getting a balanced diet, so come springtime, they're able to lay more eggs and produce even more young.
And springtime has come to Sydney. In the woods along the foreshore, a secretive tawny frogmouth guards her nest. She's wary. But her most dangerous enemies are otherwise engaged. The currawongs are displaying to their chosen mates. The flock has broken up. Most currawongs pair off for life, and this is the time of year to renew their pledges of fidelity. It's taken thousands of years for the rituals of the display to evolve. But when environmental conditions change, native species must adapt or perish. The speed at which the currawong has been able to change is what makes it so successful and so dangerous. With the unpredictable winter weather past, the bay's human residents unleash a springtime building frenzy. 100 years ago, the area was hardly settled. Now, every year, more and more hillside is replaced by 5-car garages. The bush itself is emptying, and the human population of our cities goes on growing. The currawongs, too, have recognised the benefits of residing permanently in the bay. Once, the lengthening days would have been the signal to move, to build their nests in the mountain wilderness. Unwittingly, the development of Mosman Bay has created a perfect environment for currawongs. For the majority, migration is a thing long past. Mosman, they've realised, is where the good life is. Using her breast, The female moulds the nest into a deep bowl to shelter her young family. The male looks on, displaying his readiness to mate whenever he can catch her eye. Even the juveniles, too young to breed, have taken up permanent Mosman residence. But the Currawong's presence has attracted an unwelcome visitor from far to the north. In early spring, the channel-bill cuckoo journeys south from New Guinea, searching for a suitable pair of unwitting parents for her young. And a Currawong nest, experience tells her, couldn't be more perfect. The Currawongs sense that there's a dangerous intruder in their territory. Once again, the camaraderie of the wintertime pack pays off. And soon she's under siege. Eventually, the channel bill is driven off, but her mission has already been accomplished. Among the clutch of eggs this female starts to incubate is one that's different from the rest. For the male Currawong, it's a busy time. He has 2 mouths to feed. A fat grub makes a tasty mouthful for his mate, but he's looking for more substantial fare, and soon he thinks he's found it. It's one of Richard Major's artificial nests. The Currawong seems to sense that all's not as it should be. He even pecks the nest, as if he's not quite sure it's genuine. But in the end, greed triumphs over caution. And once he's committed himself, even the unnatural texture and disgusting taste of plasticine is not enough to put him off. As spring slips into early summer, in a dozen Currawong nests around Mosman Bay, the eggs begin to hatch. In this nest, all 4 eggs have been successful. And the mother isn't about to let anything happen to her new family. The maternal instincts of the female Currawong are shared by Tanya. This is the time she feels her Currawongs need her most. One nest's been built outside her neighbour's window.
I have a feeling they needed the help from me. They are my friends, but I don't know what they are thinking about me.
Harry Recker has no doubt at all what he thinks about well-meaning Currawong lovers like Tanya.
That's a nice thing to do. People like company, but they have to understand that when they feed Currawongs steak, what they're doing is they're killing other birds, and they have to assume that responsibility.
Any predators around?
No, we haven't had Currawongs for quite some time.
Nothing else? Nothing suspicious at the nest?
No.
Yeah, can you hold that one for me?
Yes.
Richard Major's evidence is showing that Harry Recker is right. Of the 1,800 artificial nests, Dr. Major finds that 64%, well over 1,000 nests, have been attacked.
Let's have a look.
Something's had a go.
Yeah. It's got parallel marks that are sort of tapering in there.
What kind of birds are likely to be?
I'd say it's probably a Currawong, something large like that.
On closer examination, it turns out
You might
that
wanna
in the
have a look at
vast
this picture.
majority
Got
of
some really
cases,
interesting marks
the
on it.
Currawong was indeed the culprit.
Currawongs are playing a big role in the decline of small birds. In the long term, something needs to be done to reduce Currawong numbers in Sydney, if our goal is to get our small birds back again.
The natural checks on the Currawong explosion are few and far between, though there are some. In this nest, for example, there'll be no Currawong fledglings this year. 3 Currawong eggs have been pushed out. Day by day, the remaining chick grows bigger and more like a channel bill cuckoo. But it's the exception, not the rule. All over the suburb, fledgling Currawongs have left the nest and are exploring a new world which holds few dangers for them. Attracted by their plaintive calls, their mothers track them down and keep them well supplied. The survival rate of young Currawongs is well above what would be needed to maintain a stable population. The youngsters will stay with their mother until summer is nearly over, learning the skills they'll need in life. Among them, the ability to find and profit from other birds' nests. The bulbul is wary. A male Currawong has been flying patterns above the bushes that hide her nest. She's managed to guard her eggs, and now they've hatched, but her tiny nestlings are just as vulnerable. In fact, they're more so, for nestlings must be fed, and the adults must leave the nest unguarded while they search for food. For the bulbul, it's another unsuccessful year.
It's our responsibility to do something about the Currawong problem. We should take the Currawong off the protected list. The sort of thing that I'm thinking about is poisoning, a mass poisoning program. Very easy to do with Currawongs. They flock in the wintertime, they congregate there. There are tens of thousands in the wintertime. They easily come into bait. You can hit that bait with poison, and there are neat poisons for controlling birds. Totally humane, and we can begin to bring down that population.
To many people, such a drastic intervention, the mass slaughter of a native Australian bird, is quite unthinkable. But the presence of the channel bill cuckoo shows how rapidly the natural balance is changing. Before the 1950s, they were never seen in the Sydney region. Even in the 1980s, there were no more than 5 sightings a year. Last year, observers counted around 300 individual birds. But the cuckoos have a negligible effect on the rise in Currawong numbers. As the young channelbill obeys its instincts and heads north for distant New Guinea, it will fly over whole regions where a single voice is drowning out what used to be a chorus. For Dr. Harry Recker, at least, there's no dilemma. This is now a crisis caused by humans, and only human intervention can avert disaster.
We have a moral responsibility to ensure that all species can share this planet with us. And if we've created a situation where one animal has gotten out of control, particularly if it's out of control because of our activities, of what we've done, then we have a moral responsibility to try and rectify the situation.